Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This episode is brought to you by Mug Root Beer. It's 3 p.m. on a Thursday. Too late for a coffee, too early for a beer. So you walk around aimlessly in search of a mysterious third beverage. That's when you hear it. The sound of the dog. The sound of Mug Root Beer. So drink Mug Root Beer if you got that dog in you.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse on Patreon, where I tell you unsolved crime stories to keep you up at night. These episodes are exclusive to Patreon and cannot be found anywhere else. Your ongoing support makes the Red Treehouse possible. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. If you have a scary, unsolved crime story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. You'd never know it by looking at it, but one of the most dangerous locations in Northern Virginia is a small bridge on Colchester Road in Fairfax County. A single-lane underpass with railroad tracks overhead, it's tucked along one of the more secluded roads in the area. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, and in fact, looks like any number of small bridges scattered across the U.S. Except, this one is called Bunnyman Bridge. And its danger has far more to do with what happens under the bridge than on top of it. Because those walking underneath may come face to face with the terrifying Bunnyman. And make no mistake, an encounter with the Bunnyman does not end well for those unfortunate souls. To date, we've covered several myths and urban legends with scary and true backstories. The legend of the Bunnyman Bridge is no different. And while myth is scary enough, the real-life horror stories that serve as inspiration are much, much scarier. For more than 50 years, the legend of the Bunnyman has instilled fear in the Northern Virginia area. And while the story has evolved in that time frame, one thing hasn't. It's downright creepy. It seems every legend, as outlandish as some may be, all have a kernel of truth. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the genuinely haunting Bunnyman urban legend. Is the legend based on a real-life horror story? Or is it nothing more than a well-done piece of creative writing? I'll tell the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. According to legend, the most well-known version of the Bunnyman story goes like this. Quote, back in 1903, buried deep within the wilderness of Clifton, Virginia, there used to be an asylum. Pretty soon after the Civil War, people started inhabiting the area, around 300 or so population-wise. It was a very small town. Nonetheless, people didn't like the idea of having an asylum miles down the road. So they all got together and signed a petition for the asylum to relocate elsewhere. The petition passed, and a new asylum was built, which is now known as Lorton Prison, a temporary facility for convicts to stay until they are appropriately sentenced. In the autumn of 1904, the convicts were gathered and piled into a bus meant to transport them to Lorton. Somewhere during the drive, not too far from where they left, the driver swerved to avoid something, and the bus started to tip. The bus inevitably rolled over. Most of the convicts were injured, but managed to escape the bus. They fled into the night towards the woods. The next morning, a local police investigation began. They started rounding up the escaped convicts. Hours turned into days. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And everyone was recovered after 4 months. Except for 2 convicts, Marcus A. Walster and Douglas J. Griffin. Every now and again during the search for both men, the police found dead rabbits, all of them half-eaten and dismembered. Finally, they located Marcus. He was found dead by the Fairfax Station Bridge, now known as Bunnyman's Bridge. In his hand, he held a man-made hammer, knife-like tool, with a sharp rock as the head and a sturdy branch as the handle. They thought nothing of it and didn't care how he died. They only cared that he was apprehended and that they no longer had to worry about him. They named Marcus the Bunnyman, as they believed he and his tool were responsible for the abundance of deceased wildlife. Later on, they would realize they had assigned the moniker to the wrong person. Still searching for Douglas, they kept on finding dead, half-eaten rabbits. Eventually, they gave Douglas the Bunnyman title instead. Months passed by, and the police eventually gave up their search. Everyone assumed the Bunnyman was dead by now, if not gone entirely. So they went on with their small-town lives. Come October, people started seeing dead bunnies reappearing out of the blue, and started to fear the unseen. Halloween night came around, and as usual, a bunch of kids went over to the bridge to drink and do whatever kids their age in the early 20th century did. Once midnight came around, most of the kids left. But 3 remained at the bridge, 2 boys and a girl. At exactly midnight, a bright light shone from the bridge's opening, right where the kids were. A few seconds later, they were all dead. Their throats were slashed with the same type of tool that was found next to the first escapee, Marcus. Not only that, but they were cut up and down their chests and gutted like fish. The Bunnyman then hung the boys from one end of a bridge with ropes around their necks, hanging from the overpass so that their legs dangled in view of any passing cars. The girl was hung the same way on the other side of the bridge. This happened in 1905. After that, no one saw or heard anything from the mysterious Bunnyman for another year. Halloween 1906 was fast approaching, and parents as well as the teens in Clifton still remembered the incident that had occurred 1 year ago at the bridge. his bridge, the Bunnyman's Bridge. That night, 7 teens were at the bridge right before midnight. Thinking little of it, 6 remained inside, while one, Adrian Hatala, remained a good distance away, hoping to have enough time to escape if the same thing happened again. She was the only one to witness a dim light walking the railroad track just before midnight, stopping right above the bridge as the clock turned to 12, then disappearing at the same time that a bright flash came from inside. She heard the deafening sounds of terrified screaming coming from within the bridge. It lasted only seconds. Moments later, the teens were all hung from one end of the bridge, in the same way as the corpses a year earlier. Horrified, Adrian ran home and refused to tell all of what she saw. She could only spatter words and incoherent mumblings that the people of her town had to piece together in order to decipher her story. No one understood it or believed her. They charged her with the teens' murders and locked her up in the Asylum of Lorton. In 1913, the same thing happened. 9 teenagers this time, on Halloween night. Adrian was still locked up. They dropped her sentence, but it was too late. The insanity had finally conquered her. Even if she was released, she was too far gone to have a normal life. So she spent her remaining years in the asylum until she finally died in 1953 of reported shock. No one knows what exactly caused her shock, but supposedly she died in her sleep, dreaming of that one dreaded night. Perhaps the Bunnyman finally got to her. After the murders in 1913, most people stayed clear of the bridge on Halloween. Fast forward 30 years. When 1943 rolled around, 6 teenagers went strolling out on the bridge on Halloween night. A couple hours later, all of them were dead, the same way as all the others. Investigations took place, but as usual, nothing was discovered. In 1976, the same situation occurred, this time with 3 people. The only other incident that has occurred was in 1987. Janet Charlatier was enjoying the night with her 4 friends. Halloween had finally come, and they had gone out driving to enjoy the night after invading their children's candy bags. They had settled around 11 p.m. at the bridge, waiting for midnight to come. They didn't believe in the myth, so they decided to see it for themselves, and were the only ones who actually withstood the Bunnyman. It was nearly midnight, and they had waited around an hour or so when Janet started getting a little scared. They all had been pulling pranks on each other, things like jumping out of bushes and screaming, so she was already a little worked up. Midnight hit, and by this stage she was in a total panic. She was almost out of the bridge when the lights got really bright inside. When that happened, her body was halfway outside of the bridge. She saw her skin begin to tear at her chest, but nothing was piercing her. Eventually, she managed to escape. Completely horrified, she hit a hanging body and knocked herself out. When she awoke, she discovered that she had been bleeding. Luckily, the cut had just been made and wasn't very bad at all. She left and never returned to the bridge again. Since then, Janet has been seen sitting on a swinging bench on her balcony every morning, just staring in the direction towards the bridge, a couple of miles down. From then on, the Bunnyman story remains untouched and unsolved. End quote. The legend of the Bunny Man might actually be more than just a myth. In fact, it is possible there is a real backstory. On October 18, 1970, Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett was sitting with his fiancée on Guinea Road in Fairfax sometime around midnight. They were within a short distance of Bennett's uncle's home when suddenly, quote, a man dressed in a white suit with long bunny ears appeared, end quote. The couple was startled by his appearance and became more so when he began yelling at them to get off the property. Before they could react, he threw a hatchet through the front windshield of the car. Fortunately, neither Robert nor his fiancée were hurt. About 2 weeks later, the Bunny Man showed up again. This time, just a block away from the first sighting. Security guard Paul Phillips was keeping watch when he noticed a man dressed in a bunny costume on the front porch of a new, unoccupied house. The man was holding an axe. A Washingtonian article titled "The Scary, Weird, Somewhat True Story of the Fairfax Bunny Man," dated October 23, 2015, described what happened next after Phillips started talking to the man. Quote, I started talking to him, and that's when he started chopping, taking several swings at a pole on the porch. He threatened Phillips. All you people trespass around here. If you don't get out of here, I'm going to bust you on the head. End quote. What's fascinating about these stories is the evolution from scary encounters to a full-blown urban legend. Like a game of telephone, the story starts out one way, and the details change as the story passes from person to person. One article detailed this progression. Quote, someone appeared very quickly, yelled something having to do with trespassing, and threw a hatchet at a car. They did not even get a very good look at the person. All they really got was dressed in white or light-colored clothing, and may or may not have had something on his head. When the story made the papers, that something on his head became bunny ears. From there, the story started to morph quickly. Within a few years, children were swapping stories about a man in a bunny suit chasing kids through the woods with a hatchet. End quote. Even now, over 50 years since the original sightings of the Bunny Man, ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and paranormal investigators go to Bunny Man Bridge on Colchester Road with the hopes of catching a glimpse and hightailing out of there as quickly as possible. Here's a scary encounter from Reddit user Best Korea Forever. Quote, dude, you've never heard of Bunny Man Bridge. I had been living in Virginia for less than 6 months when my buddy Scott asked me this question. I was a recent transplant from New Jersey and had no idea what he was talking about. We were sitting on the lawn outside of the house we rented together, tossing back beers in the brisk evening air. No, I said. What's that? Well, back in the 70s, some kids were out by this bridge in Clifton, right? They parked near this bridge, underpass thing, looking to bang, I guess. Guy and a girl. Anyway, they park, and before they can even turn off the car, Scott's left fist smacked into his right palm. Bam! Window shatters. Crazy dude dressed like a bunny. Full bunny suit, ears and all. Standing there, hatchet in hand. He had smashed out their window. warns them to leave and never come back. They haul ass out of there, right? Tell the cops. The psycho threw the hatchet at them or something, because they had it with them. Cops never found anything. They'd find corpses out there, like every year after that. That's crazy, I said. It sounded tame compared to the stories we told and retold growing up. New Jersey is a messed up place. That was Halloween night. If you go out there on Halloween, the bunny man comes out and tries to chop you up. No, Scott. I finished my beer and put the empty can down on the dewy grass. We're not going out there. We're going out there, he said, completely ignoring me. We gotta. It's awesome. I sighed. You can't talk Scott out of doing stupid things. Ask any of the emergency room doctors that had stitched his ass back together over the years. Fine. We'll go. Scott was like a kid on Christmas Eve. It was 2 weeks before Halloween, and I figured he'd get drunk and forget all about it. I was wrong. Halloween crept up on me, and that entire day Scott wouldn't stop going on and on about our trip to Bunnyman Bridge. He filled the gas tank in his Jeep, bought snacks, even paid for some decent weed to smoke on the way out there. At this point, I'd be a jerk to say no, so off we went. The drive from Norfolk to Clifton took a little over 3.5 hours. We were going way out there. It's a tiny place with lots of historical significance. Not even 300 people living there full time. The bridge was out of town, on a back road near some old homes. I didn't believe for a minute that a crazy killer in a bunny costume would be wandering around at night. It had been almost 45 years since the story first popped up. But I do believe in being prepared. I'd been in the habit of carrying a small pistol with me everywhere I went since moving to the state. I wasn't stupid enough to leave it home. We weren't trespassing, so I wasn't afraid of getting in trouble. I have my concealed carry permit. Better safe than sorry, right? We rolled through the old town before midnight and made our way to the outskirts. During the day, I'm sure it would be a beautiful place to visit. Old churches, a steam locomotive parked on the tracks, a true throwback to the idyllic Americana of 60 years ago. At night, though, the tall peaks on the buildings cast odd angular shadows against the ground, elongated by the light of the full moon. There were no street lamps, or any kind of electric light. Most of the buildings we passed were dark. Once we drove through town and onto the back roads, it was even worse. Dense treetops bowed out over the road, blocking the moon for the majority of the drive. The headlights fought to pierce the thick fog covering the roadway. Scott couldn't have picked a better night to come out here. I'm not easy to scare, but my palms were starting to sweat a little. The hair on my forearms was on end, sending tiny pinpricks of electricity up my spine every time they brushed the interior of the car. Despite the balmy weather, I felt a chill creep along my skin. We rode in silence for the better part of the trip, before Scott pulled over and parked. He turned to face me, looked me in the eye and grinned. We're here. Without breaking eye contact, he killed the headlights and turned off the engine. The world descended into darkness, an inky black nothing that swallowed us up. Without the thrum of the old Jeep's engine, it was as quiet as a grave. The sudden silence left my ears ringing. So we drove all the way out here. Now what? I looked out the window, squinting, trying to see. The scant moonlight that cut through the canopy of leaves didn't illuminate much. We walked to the bridge. Scott didn't wait for me to respond. He got out of the car and closed his door. He began walking down the road, not looking back. I wasn't about to let him wander off without me. Scott is a disaster waiting to happen, and I didn't feel like spending my evening with him in the ER again. I jumped out of the Jeep and followed him. The road meandered through the thick trees for a few hundred yards before coming to a tight curve. We walked through the still night, side by side. Rounding the bend in the road, we reached an area where the tree cover was thinner and the moonlight broke through. The road narrowed into a concrete tube, cutting through a small raised embankment. It was too dark to see the top of the elevated roadway. In the waning moonlight, the tunnel was little more than a yawning black opening, flanked in pale gray concrete. "Bunnyman Bridge," Scott said with a sense of triumph in his voice. He took out his phone and turned to face me. Leave it to this idiot to take a selfie at a time like this, I thought. He made a stupid face, moved the phone around to line up the photo, and pressed the screen. As he did, I noticed movement near the tunnel. At first I thought I was seeing things, but then I saw it again. From the bushes on the side of the structure, a tall, white form emerged. Scott saw the look on my face and spun around, phone in hand. The flashlight on his iPhone came on and lit up the roadway. Standing there, in front of the gaping black maw of the underpass, was a man in a bunny suit, well over 6 feet tall and gangly, all limbs and no mass. There was a yellow and red fire axe gripped in his hands. The long, slender ears of the bunny suit swayed behind him as he slowly made his way toward us. Dark patches stained the front of his suit. I didn't need to stretch my imagination to figure out what it was. Blood. Scott stammered and backpedaled into me. Without thinking, I reached behind me and removed my compact pistol from its holster. I pointed the gun at the approaching form and leveled the tritium sights on center mass. Back the fuck up. I tried to sound commanding, but even I could hear the warble in my voice. "I'll shoot you, I swear to God." "Leave," he said. The bunny man didn't stop. He continued moving toward us, closing the gap. The axe swayed back and forth in front of him, and as he neared, I could see there was blood on the blade. I told myself to be rational. This was obviously a guy playing a prank on Halloween. He was trying to scare some idiots who came to see the bridge. But most people would drop that shit in a heartbeat when there was a loaded gun pointed at them. Instead, he kept coming. The movement was slow, but he kept pacing towards us. I couldn't see his face in the deep shadows, but I could tell, I knew that he was staring me in the eye. He pivoted and ran, full bore towards Scott. I didn't hesitate. I exhaled, relaxed my arms, and squeezed the trigger. Gently. The recoil shook my already strained muscles. The bunny man staggered, slowed, and slumped down into the roadway. He had only moved a few dozen feet from the mouth of the tunnel to where he now sat. The scent of cordite tainted the cool night air. Crimson oozed from the front of his suit and joined the darker brown patch already there. The axe slipped from his grip, making a dull clunk on the asphalt. Scott stammered, mouth moving like a dying fish. He turned and ran back toward the Jeep. I kept the gun trained on the man and approached with caution. The bullet had struck him in the chest, but not in the heart. Still, I was sure he wasn't going to last long. I moved to the side, kicking the axe away from him. "Scott, call the police," I yelled. He didn't respond. I let go of the gun with my left hand and reached for my phone. My right hand, still holding my pistol, betrayed my frayed nerves. It vibrated at the end of my arm. The man coughed and sputtered, blood splattering his lips. "Please," he choked out. He reached for his midsection. I assumed he was going to press his hand to the wound, but it disappeared into a pouch on the front of the bunny suit. I hadn't noticed it due to the large, dark smear across the front. His hand came out holding a furry black object. A rabbit. Neck broken, and head hanging limply to the side. He reached his arm as far forward as he could, which wasn't far, and tried to fling it to his side, back toward the tunnel opening. It landed 2 feet away with a sickening thud. He looked me in the eye. For the first time, I really took in his features. He was young, my age, maybe even younger. Clean cut. I don't know what I was expecting. Crazy eyes, maybe? Homeless drifter meth mouth, I'm not sure. But it wasn't this. "Please," he coughed out again, motioning towards the rabbit. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a pained cry, followed by a wheezing, gurgling sound. I had hit him in the lung. I stared at the rabbit, trying to understand the situation. I was in shock looking back on it. You never know how you're going to react to the fucked up situations life throws at you until you're there. That was the first time I paid attention to my surroundings since I initially saw him. The moon had shifted, and I could see the opening of the tunnel now, and the large, black fingers splayed on either side of the concrete. The opening was at least 12 feet wide, and somehow these hands were grabbing both sides at once. Hands that had to be a foot long, at least. 2 tiny red orbs danced in the darkness, the light refracting and giving them an odd pale glow. That's when I first heard the scratching. Slow, like the labored dragging of heavy furniture across an ancient wooden floor, followed by a ticking, tapping sound. The bunny man heard it too. His eyes grew wide, his mouth trembling. He attempted to speak again, but all that came out was that wet, rattling cough. He fell over, trying to reach for the rabbit. I'm not sure why I didn't run for the Jeep. I sincerely wish I had. Phone and gun forgotten, I grabbed the rabbit carcass. It was still warm. I threw it, with everything I had left in me, into the dark opening. The silence grew palpable, and the tapered shadow fingers retreated into the tunnel. I heard a sickening crunch. The dragging started again, retreating into the depths of the darkness. I looked at the bunny man, lying on the ground, laboring to breathe. His face relaxed and he smiled. His unfocused eyes locked on mine, and he looked relieved. "Your problem," he said, then laughed. The laugh turned into a gurgling, choking noise, and then he laid still. I walked to Scott's truck and found him curled up on the floor in the back seat, crying. I regained my senses enough to call the police at this point. They came out, took our statements, and my pistol. They held us for a while. The bunny man was a student who had been living in the area. We didn't find out much else. they found 2 more dead bunnies in the pocket of his outfit. They determined I had fired in self-defense, and I wasn't charged with any crime. Scott never asked to go back to the Bunnyman Bridge. In fact, he moved out a few months later, and I haven't spoken to him since. Time went by. My therapist told me that I imagined the thing in the tunnel, that it was my way of coping with killing a man who intended to do harm to me and my friend. I began to believe it. October came again, and Halloween passed without incident. I was curious, though, about why I never heard anyone talk about the real Bunnyman after what happened. You'd think that would add to the legend, but I never saw it mentioned anywhere online or in the news. I was reading a forum post about local Virginia legends when the Bunnyman Bridge came up. Most people regurgitated the same old tales about escaped convicts and supernatural rabbits. But one person posted something that chilled my blood. They found another corpse this year, eaten. Hasn't happened in 5, maybe 6 years. The Bunnyman must be gone. Cold crept up my spine. The Bunnyman must be gone. I could hear the sickening crunch of that thing eating the rabbit. Corpses. Eaten. Your problem. It took me a while to come to terms with what happened. I've spent the better part of this year driving to Clifton and walking through the tunnel during the day. I want to know every inch of that road before October. Nobody is going to die this year. I've already purchased a bunny suit and an axe. I'm not sure where to get rabbits from, but I have time. It's only August, after all. End quote. I'll admit, I think the story of the Bunnyman and the Bunnyman Bridge make for a terrific urban legend. But I'm a bit skeptical of the true story behind the myth. I'm not intending to cast doubt on the 2 eyewitness testimonies, but I do wonder if what started out as a vague, almost nondescript story of a strange guy wielding a hatchet or axe morphed into a story about a crazed, murderous Bunnyman out to get anyone who crosses his bridge. I remember hearing the story of the Bunnyman and his bridge while living in Northern Virginia in 2009. At the time, we lived within a few miles of the bridge, and I remember driving through during the daytime. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I did not see the Bunnyman while going through the Bunnyman Bridge. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with this question. Is the Bunnyman real? And does he come out to stalk his victims every Halloween night? What would you do if you came face to face with him while walking under Bunnyman Bridge? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.